Hi, all.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning, everybody.
Hello.
Morning.
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 Morning. How are you, Holly?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Oh, it's really nice to see you.
It's lovely to see you too, Juliet.
I'm not ignoring everybody else. I just know Holly. Oh.
Well, thank you all for joining us, folks. Are we okay to put our cameras, turn our cameras off and mics on mute? Thank you.
Mark's
And
on.
any questions or interactions, reflections, absolutely welcome you all to use the chat bar. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. If I can just introduce myself, I'm Nadia Hussain. I'm the education sector lead for the Violence Reduction Unit. And what that really entails and means, is, in a nutshell, is that I'm working with you guys on inclusion and supporting young people within the education space. I've got to say, it's just been, an amazing couple of weeks, having some real good conversations with all of you. And I'm just really pleased we've had the opportunity to come together and just really, really start having the conversation on how we can come together and just really start having that conversation about the vulnerability of our young people and how we can support them through the education and inclusion space. I think something that we're all really conscious of is that when the doors open in September, all of the issues that would have impacted our young people, all of the vulnerabilities that they would have had, that would have only been further exacerbated when they come back in September. So how can we collectively all come together on this shared agenda and support our young people? The vulnerability of our young people will always be a priority for all of us, and that's something that we all share together, and that's something that we all work together on. And it's how can we come together to really support and uplift that education space, September and beyond. Some great work taking place in the local authority. I've got to acknowledge some great work taking place with schools, within policing, and everybody has really been doing the best that they can do, given the circumstances that we've been in. And moving forward for us, I think it's really, really opportune in how we can come together on these challenges, on the risks, and on the opportunities. And how can we really draw on, what we've learned so far, and what does the data show us so far in terms of young people and the vulnerability. And what it really sadly shows us at the moment is, nationally and regionally within a West Midlands context as well, most of our young people that do face vulnerability and go through exclusions are young people who have SEND, are young people that have social, emotional, mental health issues, speech, language, communication needs. It's actually our looked after children as well. There's also disproportionality in terms of ethnicity as well. So how can we come together to really, really support that space? There's also lots of young people as well, that haven't got, the necessary diagnosis, intervention and support that's needed as well, and have really, really fallen through the system as well. So how can we really come together on that shared agenda, and how can we ensure that our most vulnerable young people and children, really have the opportunity to, thrive and achieve. So welcome you all in joining us today. We've got a great panel, and I'm just really, really excited in how we can come together, discuss, and, just really champion and support our young people. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our Director of the Violence Reduction Unit, Claire Gollop, who will just give us a bit of an introduction, a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the VRU, and then hand it back to me just to open up a bit more in terms of what we're doing within education. If I can hand over to you, Claire, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for giving up your time to join us today. And my apologies, because I'm hiding at the moment from some young people in my own household. So if I'm distracted, I do apologise about that. You've heard Nadia describe there that violence in the West Midlands has followed the national trend and has risen consistently despite many of our efforts for a number of years. And I'm kind of constantly amazed that it's not that we don't make more headline news and more statements. As I open our emails and our online newspapers every day and read of yet more stabbings, shootings and fatal incidents amongst our community, even just this weekend. Those incidents, they lead to an increased fear of crime amongst the wider community, and they impact on mental and physical injuries, a rise in those suffered by the members of our community, and many, many preventable deaths. And as educators and those within the education system, you will have seen the ripple effects of this amongst your students whose day-to-day reality requires considerably more bravery than we would wish for them, many of whom are expending a lot of energy on making safety decisions in order just to get through the day. It would exhaust, I think, any one of us to live a day in their lives. And there is no way, I would suggest, not being an education expert myself, but there is no way that education can really thrive with all this going on in the background. And I think you'll also have seen the impact on staff and colleagues. So too many of you will have been notified of the death or serious injury, the bereavement or the exclusion of some young person that you have worked with. And you will have seen the impact that has on colleagues that I think cannot be underestimated. So violence reduction units have been established across the country in the last couple of years, leaning heavily on the work that was done in Scotland that you might have seen in last week's Panorama programme. The VRU in the West Midlands has the advantage of building on a foundation of strong sort of partnership work under a number of guises. And it brings to the situation a public health approach to violence reduction. So we're drawing really on the method that scientists and health professionals use to try and tackle disease. So this means, in really layman's terms, that we're focusing on trying to understand the causes of violence and the reason why people get drawn into a life of crime. And we do use data and evidence, but above all, we ask people what happened to you to get you to this point. And this approach gives us a much stronger understanding of the problem, and it helps us to identify interventions that we can all take together and that have a realistic chance of changing the path the young person is on. So that could involve, and does involve in our VRU, offering help and advice to young people who've literally just been involved in violent incidents, whether that takes place in custody blocks, on the streets or in hospitals. And it also involves working with much younger children who are growing up in violent households to ensure that they learn about other ways of solving problems. So as a VRU, we've prioritised 5 different systems to work with this year. One is the education system, that's why we're all here together today. The others are health, exploitation, sports and criminal justice. And we're asked to try and effect systems change within those spaces. That's quite a difficult term to unpick. And we've determined really that what we think we can offer in each of those systems is supporting communities and professionals to work together. We know you're already doing an awful lot of this, but we want to help provide, if you like, the grease or the wheels or the overcome the obstacles that there sometimes are in collaboration. We'll commission interventions that prevent violence, and we can describe more of those in the education space later or on another call. We want to increase in those systems the use of evidence to inform decisions. This inevitably leads us to discussions about information and data sharing, but again, those can come much later in these conversations. We want to provide advice, guidance and toolkits, or to circulate and extend the use of those if they're in existence already. And we want to connect leaders around a shared long-term ambition. That's exactly what this conversation is all about. We've also prioritised across the West Midlands a number of locations to work closely within. These are places where we'll offer layered support through place-based pilots to really try and support the communities to work together in that space. This is really pertinent to this conversation that these 7 place-based pilots are going on, 1 in each local authority area this year, because one of the things that we really want to do is join up the violence reduction initiatives that are happening inside and outside of education premises and recognise the really important place that school has to play in the wider community sense of security. And likewise, how the impacts of things that are going on outside the school doors will really impact on what's happening inside educational settings. So my role as the VIU director is not to know everything there is to know about the education space or in any way to preach. It's very much one to listen. I'm asking you really to come to the very edges of your specialism, your remit and your role, and find ways to work together in that bit that's blurred about whether or not it's our job to do, you know, because I think that's where often the missed opportunities are. And the great risks, I think, for us as a community too, that it's nobody's specific job to do this, bar, I would suggest, my own and Nadia on this call. But it is absolutely everybody's responsibility, and we really need collective sort of willingness and a collective will, but also the opportunity to join up and to do something a little bit different. Now, the VIU will help support you in this journey, which you are going on as a group together. There is so much that is already happening out there that I'm delighted that we're hearing about later in the call today. And so my offer really is to listen, to support you in your endeavours, and to provide resources that will help with some of the joining up. And my ask is that there's active contribution and that you share your good ideas and that you support us to find the way forward together. So I'll hand over back to Nadia to describe a little more about the education space. I'll be online for the rest of the call, and I'm really, really looking forward to hearing your voices and look forward to meeting more of you in person over the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And just to open up the conversation and just build on that a little further in terms of what we're doing within the education space currently within the VIU. This bit here is just really, really significant for us. Just really having the conversation in terms of what really matters, what the opportunities are and what we can really collectively do together. And I guess it's more about just listening and having this conversation as a starter. So what we'd really like to do is put together these expertise and create a sector reference group and communities of practice. And the aim of those is really just to share some of the real good practice that's already taken place regionally and how the whole, I guess, that whole education system can come together so that we ensure we've got that fidelity, it's sector-led, and what our priorities are, especially in a West Midlands context. Where can we identify our shared priorities in terms of reducing violence, and what would be our regional focus as well, because I think that's really critical too for us. How can we support school leaders in the education space in approaching a trauma-informed approach? How can we uplift that space? How can we understand this really big piece that is impacting us nationally as well on school exclusions, and what are the factors and causations of that as well? And there's so many issues around that as well. If there wasn't a bigger driver of social immobility, you know, other than school exclusions, you know, not just in terms of the vulnerability of the cohorts of young people that get excluded as well, you know, the disproportionality, you know, the typography of young people that are excluded as well, and I guess the kind of pipeline of criminality that it leads to as well. How can we help that early intervention space? How can we support that intervention space? I guess when we talk about a language of exclusion, it's almost like the horse is kind of bolted, and we talk about inclusion, we're looking at our opportunities. And quite rightly so, there are times when we do need to exclude young people, whether it's fixed term, whether it's permanent, whether it's just sending a child out of a classroom door. But we've really got to start looking at that window of exclusion and just looking through that window of life of that young person as to, you know, the reasons and the causations, not to excuse, but let's start to try and better understand that. And again, so many of us are doing that within this space as well. And how do we bring all of that together? And what does the data tell us on exclusions at the moment as well? What does it tell us regionally? And again, whatever is being, you know, shared nationally as well, right from the Timpson review right through to national census to local regional data as well. Again, it reads the same. It's some of our most vulnerable young people that end up being excluded from schools. What we're also doing is we've got that ask in terms of, you know, coming together, and I'd really, really welcome, you know, from local authority leads, education specialists, anybody and everybody in education, please, you know, do get in touch with us. We'd welcome expressions of interest for communities of practice and the sector reference group in how we can come together, look at our risks, challenges, but more importantly, our opportunities in where we can come together and support this space. We were also putting a trauma-informed toolkit together. It's had lots of input from lots of different education leads as well. And this toolkit is really there to support the education space when the doors open in September. And something that we will all have in common in terms of our shared agenda and our concerns is the vulnerability of young people. So how can we support that? How can we help support, upskill the staff in terms of just providing them with tools, having those conversations as well, and just giving them that kit to help them with that. So that's something that we'll be putting through. It's in the process at the moment. And again, you know, it's something that we'll socialise, and we'll welcome your feedback with that as well before it goes off for print and publish. Again, it's got to be really relevant to our education space. Another part of our exciting journey are education intervention advisors. So ads will hopefully be going out towards the end of this week, and they will be working regionally within each locality, and they'll be working directly with schools and working through education and the local authority. And they'd really be providing, I guess, that kind of bespoke service to what really matters in the education space locally, because we understand not one size fits all. You know, the demographics, I guess the needs, the demands, the issues, you know, that schools face differ, you know, within each region. So each education EIA, Education Intervention Advisor, will be based locally. From recruitment right through to, shall we say, landing, we will be working really, really closely with regional leads on this as well. And we've got to really ensure, I guess, that they are relevant to the education space and what it means in that education space. And I guess that differs from each region. And we're also in the process of putting together our core and universal offer. Some of the things that we have in place that have worked really well so far, and we've been able to roll out, our MVP, which is our Mentors in Violence Prevention programme. And it's been incredibly successful. We've had some, you know, real good uptake in the last 2 years within that space. It's a secondary school programme. And what we've been working on this year is just really taking that feedback in terms of how we can improve it and how we can open it up to the wider sector as well. So we've created a primary school programme for MVP. We've done that through the University of Birmingham, the Jubilee Centre for Character. We've created a MVP programme for the FE sector as well. And that's been done in collaboration with the FE Alliance, the FESPG. We've created a youth space programme and a sports space programme as well for young people. And that's been done through Positive Youth Foundation. And we've also created a model for mosques and madrasa spaces as well, because it's an ideal opportunity. We've got a captive audience of 99% of young Muslim children that attend an after school provision as well, you know, and again, we need to start having these conversations there too as well. And that's been created by the Association of Muslim Schools. We've also got trauma-informed training as well, which has had some, you know, phenomenal uptake, and we've really upskilled lots of professionals within that space as well, within education and the wider space too as well, and that's something that we'll be continuing to. So there's lots of things that we'll have around the core and universal offer, but I guess that wider conversation will be having those conversations with yourselves as local authority leads, as folks working within the local authority as well, within this education space as well. What are the asks, what are the demands, and how can we more importantly support what really reflects those local needs in terms of what we put together, and how these education intervention advisor roles can really support and empower the education space, to what is really relevant and what really matters and what is really impactful in terms of the educational priorities in the area. So that's really in a nutshell in terms of what we're doing, but absolutely welcome the conversation with all of you beyond this meeting here today. Like I said, I've been having lots of really, really, really rich conversations with so many folks around this space, so absolutely welcome that. Please do use the chat bar for any of your questions, any of your thoughts, any of your reflections. We'll have a Q&A panel at the end where we'll be collating all of these and presenting these questions to the panel, so please do utilise that. I really want to acknowledge somebody really important for me and all of us that's joining us today, and that's Oyin. And Oyin is actually a young person, probably younger than all of us. And I think what's really important, when we're doing all of this work with young people, is to really critically ensure that we've got that young person's voice within all of this, because really this is what it's all about. And Oyin, we came across on a community panel, and she really spoke passionately and eloquently about education, really gave me a run for my money as well, which is great. And I think, Oyin, thank you so much for joining us today, and I really welcome, your thoughts or your reflections or your questions, for our panel later, because really this is about young people here, and I know Oyin brings lots of, I guess, lived experience through family and friends as well around this inclusion piece. So thank you so much, Oyin, for joining us, and I really welcome you here today. So I'm just going to move on to our first panellist here, Chris Pollin, and he'll be speaking to us today from Her Majesty's Inspectorate. Chris is an Ofsted inspector, and Chris has been doing some fantastic work around Walsall, and alongside Chris will be his colleague Andrea Packer, who is from the FE sector, and they've been doing some phenomenal trauma-informed work. And it's a really good example within the West Midlands of collective, collaborative work. So without further ado, Chris, if I could just hand over to yourself.
Of course. Hi. Is my sound okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. Okay. First of all, just to sort of clarify, say, first of all, thank you so much for letting me come along today. I really appreciate that. I'm here actually in my vocation as, or my role as working with Walsall, because actually, as Nadia said, over the past sort of 10 weeks, due to the COVID pandemic, I've actually been redeployed to Walsall. So quite pleased to share that work, and what I want to do basically, and probably just in a sort of few minutes, is give a flavour of what Walsall I've been working on, because it is quite exciting. And listening to Nadia and Claire fits in quite a lot with that work, about that collaboration and sharing of good practice. What I'm going to try and do now is share my screen. So hopefully everyone should see on the screen where we have. If I could get a nod from anybody if they can see us start the PowerPoint. Brilliant, thank you very much. Great, thank you. What I want to do then is, like I said, just for a few minutes, is talk about the journey Walsall I've been on. And when I talk about Walsall, I talk about collectively education, but also with health and social care. But also work with the police, with Kim Medill, and with Nadia as well. It's been an amazing journey over the past sort of 3 months for services to come together, and I'm quite excited about this journey. Can I say another thing? And I'm so pleased to be sharing the stage with Andrea, because I think the work that the college has done with around the violence reduction has been amazing. And actually, in many ways, really inspired a lot of the work I'm going to share with now, generally about what Walsall has done. So it's important I recognise that, but I won't steal any of Andrea's thunder because it really is amazing. So when I first came to Walsall were quite clear that they wanted to develop this approach to social, emotional and mental health, that quite rightly they would believe that when we look at many of the issues in schools at the moment, such as exclusions, and I don't just mean academic exclusion, I mean social exclusion as well, children being left out, families being left out, that actually the bottom line to that came from mental health, emotional well-being. Okay, and that actually there needed to be this focus on this. So what I did originally was I spoke with a number of schools, and these were the schools that put their heads above the parapet, you could say, and say, listen, we want to talk about this. We want to open up this conversation, really. And all these schools by no means were saying they're experts of these settings, but they were saying that actually we're on that journey and we're keen to get even better. And through speaking to these, through these organisations, it came to me there's a huge wealth of really exciting provisions out there and exciting strategies put in place to really help young people thrive and really to help their social, emotional and mental health needs. And then also what I noticed is actually there was a huge number of organisations as well who were desperate to actually make that difference. And I think a lot of what Nadia and Claire were saying about that partnership, it was very evident that there's lots of people who wanted to make a difference in this area and they wanted to work collectively. And that was really powerful for me as a sort of as a guest in Walsall. But one sort of key question came in my mind, and it was a very bold question, was where does it all fit? Because actually, if I was a head teacher in a school or a setting leader or a principal, and I was looking at this huge wealth of information, these huge wealth of strategies, I'd actually start to think, well, where do I start? Where do I actually build all this? Who do I approach for help? Because everyone's offering help and there's lots of strategies out there, but I couldn't see how they fit. And this was the question that we started to develop over the last 3 months. But actually, it's something that, and I think it's Nadia said before, the acknowledgement that actually each setting is different. And each setting will be based and will serve a different, unique and wonderfully unique community. So therefore, their approach would have to be different. Okay. So saying that, though, was there anything, though, that could bring people together? And the answer was yes. There was something that could bring, and there was something that people spoke passionately about. And what I want to do is, again, as much as possible, my meeting with the college was probably one of the most profound meetings I've had in the last however many months and years, because actually they started challenging my thinking about how this could all come together. And what the notion was, it came together in almost like a triangle, a pyramid. But actually within this, there was 3 layers. And no matter which setting I spoke to, they all talked about their provision for emotional well-being and mental health in sort of layers or tiers. And what I want to do is just quickly go through those. The focus, no matter what, was always on the right help at the right time. Okay, and that is what all these people were unified on, getting young people, families and also members of staff, because we all acknowledge on this call that if you're going to make the biggest difference to young people's emotional well-being, mental health, then you need to have stronger mental health and you need to be in a good place emotionally. But the first level that all these settings were talking about was acting to create a safe, happy, engaged and resilient community. And can I say that one of the meetings I've been in with the Violence Reduction Unit has actually opened up my mind so much that if we look just in terms of schools in this one, we fail. It's that wider community. And actually, Walsall, the local authority, in terms of the education side of things, has also bought into that this includes the full range of communities. But actually, when we looked at this was in how people approached each other, how people speak to each other. It was in that child who's having a bad day and that member of staff noticing she was having a bad day, or he was having a bad day and saying, how are you doing? And it was in those policies, those procedures. It was even in those street lamps for that were always lit for when a child walks to school and walks home from school. And it was actually, what were these settings doing to making sure this was a safe, happy, engaged and resilient community? The next tier that came across that people spoken to, and I have to say, this is the one where I felt really particularly inspired. It's where these settings were overcoming barriers, and it's overcoming barriers to mental health. Mental health still has a phenomenally bad stigma attached to it. It is still, people do not feel comfortable in speaking about it. One of the settings I spoke to that was really pleased to speak, we talked about an assembly one day, and they talked about speaking to all the children in the assembly, and they said to the children, please put your hand up if you've had any physical illness over the last 12 months. About 75% of the children put their hands up. They then asked the question, put your hands up if you've had any mental illness over the last 12 months, and not a single young person put their hand up. Well, these settings I spoke to and a host of other settings were raising the profile now. They're doing things on the basis of making sure that there's messages across the school saying it's okay to feel how you feel. They're having hubs within their settings where children can go and get the support they need, rather than actually them having to go into crisis. Education has, unfortunately, in the last few decades been a default or a deficit model where things have had to go wrong before the support is put in place. These settings I spoke to were talking about redressing that. They were making sure support was freely accessible all the time. The final stage was about acting to repair and protect. And I have to say, I was really inspired by the college with this. The work they're doing with GRIT is very powerful at this stage. What do they do when the relationship has failed? What does all these settings do when it looks like the child is at a point where they face some level of exclusion? And that's, like I say, not just academic, but social exclusion, where families are breaking apart, where relationships, what happens in those settings? And it was this layers that almost developed as a Walsall approach. And the key question was why are we doing this? And I'm going to follow on from something very powerful that Claire said before. The reality was about this is about safeguarding, and this is about making sure no child misses out on education. I'm going to take it a step further. It's about making sure that no child misses out on life. And that's the reason why this Walsall approach has evolved, but also incentivizing, making sure that it's the best conditions for every young person. And where we were up till today, or actually including today, is actually that the services spoke to from education, from health, from children's services, from members of the VIU, from the police, is that we would have this joined up approach, okay, and that we will commit to this network or commit to this framework, okay. But the reality, going back to what I said, is my last point, is that frameworks could look different in different settings. One setting could have restorative and trauma-informed practice as in their base, making sure that every member of staff knew about that. They might raise the profile of mental health through ACEs or nurture group. And when things start to go wrong, they might look at things around GRIT. Another setting, also maintaining the framework, might show that all members of staff had child development training so they can spot when the gaps aren't there for that crucial child development, which can make such a difference later on. A lot of Walsall settings now are making sure that they have a range of staff with mental health first aid training, be it for adults or children. And then the work with CAMS, which I'm really pleased with, is the way schools are working with, are looking at things such as therapeutic intervention or things like IAPT. But the reality is, just my final point, is the framework is the same, but how that framework looks in different settings is very different, okay? And that's sort of where I got up to, okay, or where we're up to in terms of the overall. So I'm going to see if I can stop sharing that. Okay, fantastic. So Nadia, do I pass over now to Andrea?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, I've just unmuted now, so hopefully you can hear me. Okay. Okay, can I just check that you can all see my presentation?
I can't see anything.
Okay. Let's try this. Can we see it now?
No, Andrea.
You still can't see it?
No.
Moment. Why does this happen? Right, so that's that. Let's try again.
Yes, that's fine.
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Oh my goodness. On my screen, it seriously didn't look like I was sharing. So that's really good news. Fantastic. Okay. Thank you so much for your kind introduction, Chris. And it's been an absolute pleasure working with you. I'm here on behalf of Jane Holt, who's our assistant principal. She's not able to be here today. So she's asked me if I would just come and share our journey of our trauma-informed college approach with you today. So I'm really pleased that I can do that on her behalf. I'm Andrea Packer and I am the designated safeguarding lead at the college. And I only joined the college in January, so it's been quite a fantastic opportunity to be involved in the joint work with the Violence Reduction Unit and look at how we can support some of our really, really vulnerable young people. So it's been an absolute pleasure to start this work and become involved in it. Okay. I think the starting point for talking to you about our initiative really comes back to our college mission statement. You know, and that is that each and every individual young person is supported to have transferable and life skills to enable them to achieve their full potential. And it also means that we're really passionate about our students and we're really passionate about their future and also our communities. So I suppose really the question is why we decided to do something different and start the trauma-informed journey. Well, our experiences of students presenting with negative behaviours has increased over recent years. And so to support this, we've increased our pastoral support. We've also increased our counselling service. We've increased the amount of tutorials and safeguarding, stay safe work into our curriculums. And we've also continued, however, to see a significant increase in our safeguarding disclosures and referrals. So despite all of this additional work and support, we're still seeing that we're perhaps not tackling this as best as we can. But alongside of this, we've had to implement obviously our college policy to support those students that have been found in possession of drugs. We give them a chance to take part in a drugs rehabilitation programme. And when they complete the programme successfully, it means that students can continue in their education and for most, progress in their chosen pathway. And this is the right approach. This is very, very proactive. And in the majority of cases, it is the right approach for that young person. However, when a student is found to be in possession of a knife or a weapon, it is our policy to exclude those students, and there are no second chances. And of course, safeguarding of others in the college and for that young person is paramount, and rightly so, and that is still our college position. However, we do know that excluding young people from education is pushing them to make other choices, choices that are probably going to be quite negative for their future and outcome. And we know that by keeping young people in education, keeping them progressing on a career pathway will ultimately serve them better for the future. So the college is asking itself these quite difficult questions, and we are challenging our own policy and our own procedures. But, you know, really, what if that individual is carrying a knife because they're frightened? Or what if the student is misguided? But the most important question is, how can our practices prevent that young person from carrying a weapon or a knife and remain in education? So becoming a trauma-informed organisation is much, much bigger than the college, and it's about supporting young people to play a real positive role in our society and also in our own communities in Walsall. So we started our trauma-informed journey back in November 2019. We were discussing with our local partners and asking ourselves the questions about how do we support young people who carry weapons? Should it be an exclusion from education, or is there a better way? And I don't think we've really got that answer just yet, but we are on a journey to find those answers. We are on a journey to support young people, and we know that by our training that we're giving our staff around adverse child experiences, the Mentors in Violence Prevention Programme and our GRIT programme, we know that this gives time for both our teachers, our members of staff and our students to think differently about their own behaviour, but also young people's behaviour and why they do what they do, and how we can help them change the more negative behaviours or prevent individuals from feeling that they may need to carry a weapon or become involved in those negative influences around them. So let's have a little look in more detail about our wellbeing and trauma-informed approach and what this actually means in real terms. So as a college, we've created a hub of wellbeing initiatives that come together under one umbrella, and it's a hub of specific support for our staff and our students to access with an underlying approach, a trauma-informed approach. And the hub is a way in which we demonstrate our actions about how we're committed to improving the well-being of our students, how we're developing and embracing a trauma-informed practice throughout not just the pastoral side of college life, but the curriculum side too. So our wellbeing approach is broken down into 3 sections. And we know, looking at the slide at the top piece, we understand what you are or you have been experiencing for students and parents. And we know that sometimes it's about breaking down those barriers with parents and students. It's about ensuring that they know we aren't judging them, that there's no stigma about past events or situations, and it's helping them and encouraging them to understand and be reassured that we do know about adolescent childhood experiences and the trauma and subsequently how that can impact on young people's lives. But also it's about the way we speak with young people and their families. It's about how we look at ways to support and help young people to see that actually there is a way forward. They can succeed, and we're going to be with them on that journey all the way. But of course, we're a learning and education provider, and that is our core business at the end of the day. But it is also about including and supporting and developing young people to help them to achieve what they want to achieve so that they can move into adulthood successfully. And within our college community, we want to continue and develop a trauma-informed approach within our community. It's about changing that narrative, really, about helping young people, parents, staff to look differently at why young people might be having difficulties and behave in the way that they do. We're also challenging ourselves to ask if there is another approach to resolving that situation, a positive solution that, whilst it might take a little bit longer, it's more effective, and it's about putting those different layers of support in place, keeping that young person at the centre and giving that young person a completely different message. And that is that as a college, we want to work alongside you and we want to help you become citizens of the future. And finally, it's about flooding the local community with our core business and our wellbeing approach. It's about involving our partners and agencies, just as we've been doing in this initiative. And we want to strengthen the understanding and acceptance of young people. We want to build resilience and change that community response for young people. And it's certainly an exciting and challenging time for us all. So I'm just going to talk you through how our layered approach looks here in college. So I've talked to you about those layers previously, and it's basically really about layering on top of what is already in place in the college. So our core level of support, universal support for all of our students. So all of our students have support from our pastoral team, who work mainly on identifying the barriers to engagement in learning, such as irregular attendance or some behaviour concerns, but it's also about supporting their learning through learning mentors as well. We have a wide range of learning support services too for some of our most vulnerable students, and we have a committed staff team who are able to undertake appropriate assessments and implement support, for example, for our deaf students, but also for our looked after children. And a large part of our support for students comes under student engagement. So this is where we deliver tutorials containing safeguarding information about keeping safe, about risks that we may be aware of in the local community, about British values and the risks of radicalisation, but we also start to talk about mental health and well-being and our Ready Respectful Safe initiative as well. So this is our core offer, and it's available to all students, and it underpins the layers that we're building on top of it. So we start to build on our core offer for our students, and we add in further interventions and support which trigger at various points. And these will be similar to the ones that you might see in some education settings that are already in place that Chris referred to. You know, it's very similar, but it would look different in different provision settings. And this is a targeted level, and we sort of introduce more targeted support. So our dedicated Stay Safe weeks and the youth cafe initiatives, where we identify groups of targeted young people who we feel may benefit with some further input around risks, around radicalisation, knife crime, or being involved in gangs. We also have 2 trained counsellors who offer critical and vital support for our students. And finally, our safeguarding team, who I line manage, obviously to make sure that we are protecting our students, keeping them safe from harm, and that the appropriate action is taken at the right time to make sure that statutory involvement is necessary. And then we move on to the work around GRIT and Street Teams and Mentors in Violence programme, and this is further targeted support. This is where we see our next layer and where we include all of this work that we've been doing since October last year. And this introduces all those additional pieces of support that we feel are really necessary and vital for our students here in college. Chris talked a little bit about mental health, and I'm a Mental Health First Aid England trainer, and I'm able to deliver training to staff in the college. And since I've joined, I've delivered some training already, and I think we've taken about 40 members of staff through first aid training, which is a 2-day course, and also a mental health half-day aware course. And it's so important that we think about mental health and how we can introduce this, so that I think we talk about safeguarding being everybody's business. Well, certainly mental health is everybody's business too. And it's really, really important that we have this as part of our interventions. And so I have been delivering the training through Mental Health First Aid England. And what it does, it trains staff to equip them with skills to support their own and others' well-being. It isn't about diagnosing a condition or labelling a condition. It's about empowering people to actually notice those subtle signs of mental ill health and how to signpost to support for recovery. And so that's a great piece of work that we've recently introduced into this. And so to summarise really, we've had a quick journey around our trauma-informed approach, but basically I think there are some key things that are really, really important. As a trauma-informed college, we want to change the narrative, and that has to be the most important thing. Changing that narrative that labels young people, that stigmatises them, and that narrative is often negative and really difficult to talk about. And we live in a society where young people of today are often stereotyped and sometimes involved in crime and antisocial behaviour. Well, absolutely, that's young people and that's what's happening. That's life, that's what's happening outside our college doors. But what we need to do is look underneath all of this and tackle what has happened or what is currently happening. It's not about putting an intervention in place and hoping everything will get better. It's not a short-term sticking plaster option, because for some of our students, we know that this is going to be a long, long journey, and one that opens up all kinds of feelings and emotions. But as a college, our wellbeing hub is to layer that support and to be tenacious, ask difficult questions that we might not like or we might not understand the answers to. But the success of our trauma-informed approach won't actually be successful if we don't work to change the response from our wider community, to challenge all those beliefs and perceptions, the cultural norms and attitudes, and that is no easy task. It is, however, something that as a college we are fully committed to and working alongside our partner agencies, and we are starting to make inroads into changing this. And finally, without our staff, we wouldn't be able to adopt this new initiative. You know, it's about empowering our staff, it's about training them and giving them the support and encouragement to change their narrative with young people. And it is challenging, but we're going to work in a different way, and then our students will hopefully make some of the progress that we want for them. And it's not just about helping them to achieve on their chosen course, it's about helping them to understand what's happened to them along their life journey too. And just quickly, at the bottom of my screen, I don't know whether you've noticed on the slides, I've just put a little tagline that says, all I wanted was for someone to ask me, are you okay? I work with a young girl who, whose father had been taken into prison. She'd come into school that day, he'd been arrested at home, but she'd put her school uniform on and she'd come into school and she'd got through the day and had gone home at the end of the day. And when I picked up with her, I said, you know, how on earth did you get through that day? Because that must have been absolutely horrendous for you. And she said to me, and I said, what would have helped? And she said to me, all I wanted was for someone to ask me, are you okay? And that stayed with me for a long time. And I know Chris has heard that before, but it's an important tagline, because sometimes that's all we need to do. Are you okay? And then we can start that conversation about helping young people to become citizens of our community, so that we can be really proud of them, and we can go from there. And I think that come to the end there. Lovely. And I'll stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Thank you, Andrea. Some really profound work there. And Kim, if you could just kindly give us a few words as well. So we've got Kim Medill here from West Midlands Police, Chief Inspector Kim Medill, and who's also been working really closely in driving this work around Walsall. If I can just hand over to you, Kim.
Yes, I'm here. You've just demoted me, Nadia. I'm actually superintendent, but that's all right. I'll forgive you. And thank you to Chris and Andrea, who have beautifully described kind of what we did. But I just wanted to kind of explain why I think it's really important that the police are involved in this work. And actually, it's quite a nice segue from what Andrea just said at the end in terms of the police arresting that young girl's father. I think often communities and partners think police are all about enforcement, and that is one of our roles. But one of the biggest responsibilities we have is to prevent crime in the first place and harm in our communities. So I'm the Safer Walsall Partnership lead for reducing violence, and really proud of the work that we put together with the college. The context of this, as you're probably aware, is a local and national violence rise, particularly with young people. And actually, this was all about how do we bring together our mutual benefits to get better life chances for young people, to protect the community, to protect young people, but also then reduce kind of violence. And you've heard what we did. And very simply, in terms of what we did, was we raised awareness amongst students and staff and the rationale for some of the work we were doing about becoming a trauma-informed, trauma-responsive site. We gave the staff and the students some skills that they could rely on, and what you get from that is change. And that's what we saw in a very short space of time at the college. And, you know, from a policing perspective, you know, really committed to working with the Violence Reduction Unit, really committed to protecting young people and our communities. And that model was always going to be about putting all of the evidence base that we knew was really good into one location to see what the outcome would be. And I know Chris really championed the fact that moving forward, though that framework that has come out as a result of that and then discussion across the wider partnership is how we want to engage with the education sector in Walsall and beyond to get those bespoke interventions depending on what your challenges are. So it was going to be a hub and spoke model. The college were fantastic in helping us with that work. And the plan now is to come out and work with education settings across Walsall. And I know Nadia is keen to take it beyond that. so that we get better life chances for our young people, and therefore better outcomes for community and prevention of crime. And that's why the police should be involved in these discussions, because there's mutual benefits for all of us. And I think that's all I wanted to say for now. Thank you for inviting me, Nadia.
Thank you, Kim. Some really, really powerful work that's taken place there in Walsall. Some real critical collaborative partnership work that you've really brought together and joined together. And it's just such a fantastic model that we've got here. I mean, nationally as well, there isn't anything similar to the kind of work that you guys have done. So, and in terms of, making a difference to young people's lives and absolutely meeting them where they're at, which is really critical, which is what we don't often do with young people. And like all of you echoed as well, it's just to ensure that no child misses out on life. So some great work there. Thank you for sharing, Kim. If I can if I can just hand over to Holly Parish. Holly is leading on the SEMH Pathfinder work that's taking place in Birmingham across lots of different schools. It's a great programme that again looks at collaborative partnership and bringing together education, social care and lots of other partners as well. So Holly, if I can just leave it to you to share the great work that's taking place there. Thank you.
Thanks, Nadia. I haven't got a presentation, and I will just say I think my colleague Rob McCabe would be devastated if he thought I was being described as leading the Pathfinder. It's very much Rob's work that he's leading on. But I am leading on the implementation of Pathfinder in Lumen Christi Catholic Multi-Academy. Lumen Christi is a small multi-academy trust based in South Birmingham, primarily around Kings Norton. We've got 6 primary schools and a secondary school, St Thomas Aquinas. And at this point, I will apologise to some colleagues I can see are on the call, because they will be quite familiar with the work that we're doing. So, feel free to mute me for the next sort of 10 minutes. So my background, I worked with West Midlands Police and the secondary schools in South Birmingham for about 9 years as the police and school partnership manager for the police and school panels. And as part of that work, what I noticed was that we had a lot of young people that were continually coming back onto the spreadsheet again and again and again for being involved in crime and antisocial behaviour in the community. Now, as part of the police and school panel process, what we do is ask the schools to intervene when they become sort of aware of the students becoming involved in crime and antisocial behaviour. As I moved on in my career and picked up a strategic safeguarding role for Lumen Christi, and went to understand how the interventions were taking place within the school setting, I was quite surprised to see that a lot of the school staff and DSLs are very highly trained and very effective in making onward referrals to prevent harm, and undertaking mentoring and such like to support young people either away from crime and antisocial behaviour or to protect them from harm generally. What I saw was that they didn't feel confident to intervene early enough, and that's why the kids that were coming up on the police and school panel spreadsheet were coming up again and again and again and again. And it's because by the time the interventions were put in place, it was too late in some respects. There was limited opportunity to really engage the family positively. A lot of the kids had school exclusions, perhaps difficult relationships with school staff because of the lack of understanding of the perhaps trauma or historic issues and barriers that had affected not only the child but the family. So talking to DSLs, around our schools. They were keen to get involved with families earlier, but they didn't know how necessarily to engage them. And as I say, the confidence actually of our school staff to work preventatively rather than reactively, I didn't feel was quite where it needed to be. So having worked with Rob McCabe, the strategic lead of Pathfinder, in my other role with the police and school panel, we looked at how we could use the Pathfinder approach to early help in Loom and Christie schools to change the culture around early intervention and early help. So that's what we've done over the past couple of years. It has considerably gained momentum in the past 12 months. So I'll just outline a little bit about the approach and then tell you some of the work that we've been doing more recently and the impact that we're seeing on our school community. So the Pathfinder approach to early help is a tripartite relational model of collaborative and sustained working with families. So it's about really using our existing school staff, our teaching assistants, learning mentors, obviously DSLs, but also class teachers as the lifeline into the family home to build those relationships, those trusting relationships with families. I mean, primary school is a brilliant place to start because a lot of the families obviously are at the school gates. But really having the relationship so that issues are flagged up and help can be sought at the earliest possible opportunity. So by working with school staff around training, supervision, ongoing support, rather than put support workers into schools as external bodies, external family support workers that a lot of schools do buy in, we train up the existing school staff and bring them out of the school setting to build a locality-based, a place-based multi-agency team. So the multi-agency team in Kings Norton has got expertise from substance misuse, Barnardo's Children's Centres, DWP, obviously police colleagues, the fire service, social care and health and NHS, to really build the skills and knowledge of those school workers. I then take that back into school, not only working with families in a long-term, sustained way through their school career, but also having built their knowledge from the specialist team that they become part of. And that allows us really to expedite support. So the idea of right help, right time, I've never seen achieved in a way that we've been able to achieve it with the Pathfinder approach, which really focuses on that collaborative working and early help model. So the other thing that we knew that we had to change within our Loom and Christie schools was the way that we engaged families, and it does actually echo what's already been said by Andrea and by Chris. And it's this idea of no judgment, but taking it one step further, having positive regard for our families. I was pretty horrified a few years back to be sitting in a meeting to discuss vulnerable pupils and to hear some of the dialogue around the table and judgments being made about families where we knew children were having issues, and it was judgmental and it was negative, and we really had to challenge that, elegantly challenge how school professionals, not just school professionals, but professionals engage with the families. So everything that we do within the Pathfinder approach is underpinned with this idea of holding our families in positive regard, working with shared authority, making sure that families feel equally empowered as professionals to move the issues forward positively. So so that's been a really massive learning curve for our members of staff. But also making sure that staff are aware about the social prescription opportunities within the community. That's something we're just sort of moving forward with now, because again, getting staff to understand that resilience for families and resilience for children is really built by this idea of belonging. So again, echoing what Chris and Andrea said, challenging isolation, giving people a sense of belonging, not just to the school community. We've got school community that care about the families, and it's a bit uncomfortable to say on a call with about 67 people, but love the families, and can express that appropriately through the support and encouragement that's on offer. So giving them that sense of belonging, giving them the confidence to come and ask for help seeking, belonging, and also learning about how they can overcome things like trauma, work in a psychologically informed way with their children and with professionals. That all is going to help us build the resilience in the families. So it's quite it's quite difficult to summarise it, and I'm not a very succinct person at the best of times, but to summarise it in 10 minutes, it's quite it's a systems change approach. It's very organic, and there's quite a lot to it. So just to tell you a little bit about how we've moved this forward more recently with Thomas Aquinas School. The school were lucky enough to receive some funding through the VRU as a sort of catalyst to releasing 5 members of staff to join their Pathfinder team. As we've got now, I think it's 9 members of Pathfinder staff in Lumen Christi, and working with the learning mentors who deliver pastoral support in the school, we've been able to train them in the early help framework, encourage them and also support them to have early help conversations with students, as soon as they start bubbling up or they just see, got some behaviours indicating vulnerability, that they're happy to have those early help conversations, and then use that to inform their work with parents. So from having 1 family support worker within a school, we've now got 7 family support workers in essence in St Thomas Aquinas. But an important thing is they're part of the community that live in the local area. They managed to create these really fantastic supportive relationships with the students, where sometimes the teachers might not have the opportunities to do that. We found that our pastoral or teaching assistants and learning mental staff really are skilled, an untapped skill set in forming those relationships. So we've now done 3 months before shutdown a programme of training in early help and safeguarding. We've also done training around trauma-informed and ACEs. They're shortly to have training on the teenage brain, and that's actually been decided to go through to the whole school staff to understand how a teacher's reaction and a child's understanding of a situation can really aggravate one another. And we will be having a programme of psychologically informed environments training and reflective practice across the next academic year to really build their confidence and expertise as a specialist family workforce within the school. So that's, there's a lot more to it, and I think that, what I would reiterate at this point is using the school staff as this untapped specialist workforce, being able to give this lifeline into the family and sustained family support. And the idea is then, if we can do that at the earliest opportunity, we can prevent, escalation of need. We can understand perhaps the traumas and barriers affecting kids as early as possible and work with the family to address that. We can create brilliant relationships with positive regard with our families, and that will all support our children to access education successfully and be able to achieve their ambitions. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but if anybody would like any more information and perhaps a bit of more of a slow time chat, feel free to get in touch. Thanks, Nadia.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you so much for sharing that. And absolutely, that sense of belonging, it's just a real basic human need, isn't it? You know, really powerful stuff. Thank you. If I could just move on to Steve Derham. Steve is the head of Dudley Local Authority Pupil Referral Unit, and Steve does some fantastic work there. And Steve is joining us today to share some of the experiences and the challenges that young people face within the Pupil Referral Unit. If I could hand over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, Nadia. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Morning, everybody, and thanks, Nadia, for inviting me to share my experience. As I'm sure you can all see, that I've been in education for quite some time, over 40 years, and worked across a whole range of settings, from mainstream pupil referral units to social care residential settings. I set up one of the first learning support units in the country for children at risk of exclusion, special schools, educational psychology service, and a school improvement advisor. I also worked across the authorities Sandwell, Telford, Wrekin, Shropshire, and now Dudley. It's been a long journey working with some extremely vulnerable and challenging young people, but I'm highly passionate about this area of work to help ensure they fulfill their potential. I don't believe I've worked with a child yet that has not wanted to be successful in school, or with a parent that doesn't want their child to be successful. They might not recognise it at the time, but I can assure, once they start to believe in themselves, improve their self-worth, then they buy into it and they want it. For me, the starting point has got to be looking at what they can do well. We know that many of these children have had challenges and what they don't do well. Whether that be maths, English, football, or as one pupil said to me, "I'm not good at anything, sir." I said, "You must be." And he said, "Lomping and rotting." I would ask the audience if anybody knows what lomping and rotting is. I didn't know at the time. He went on to explain it was actually lamping and ratting. And his dad was a professional ratter. And he told me in great detail how he used to go out and help his dad catch rats. He then said, "Sir, I'm good at drawing." And he went on to draw these amazing pictures of kestrels, rabbits, and other wildlife. And from that minute, we got on absolutely fabulously. And that was a way to ensure that he engaged with his learning. Quite often it would be 10 minutes of maths, 15 minutes of drawing wildlife. But he came back to school after he left to see me on many occasions. Currently, I'm head teacher at Sycamore Short Stay School, 32 place provision, 12 places for Key Stage 1, 2, and 20 places for Key Stage 3. As Nadia's already mentioned, you know, Permanent exclusion. Should our children have to be permanently excluded? And that, as colleagues have already said, a child with a knife, etc., that might be the case. I believe that in lots of instances we shouldn't have to permanently exclude children. I've got children as young as 5, 6 that have been permanently excluded, and part of that reason is non-recognition of the needs of the child, etc. All the children, or majority of children that come to the PRU have to be taxied in to school because they come from across the borough. I believe that we need to be looking at earlier intervention, shared placements, so that children can stay within their local school, but they can come to our setting, etc., prior to being excluded. The difficulty we've got is we've got limited capacity. Therefore, we've always got more children than places. So that is certainly something we need to consider. And alongside that, the actual needs of the children, when the children come into our settings, we do assessments on them. That's both learning to get an understanding of the level that they're functioning at, the gaps they've got, but also to understand their attitudes to learning. And some people might be aware of past people attitudes to self in school. We do that, which looks at 7 different factors, looking at attitudes to teachers, perceived learning capability, etc. And many of our children in the bottom 5 percentile. They feel that they're failing in school. They don't want to be in school. The parents don't value school. Many of our pupils' parents have unfortunately been in the same position where they failed in school, might have been permanently excluded, etc. So they have no value. With that, we've got to change that cycle. And for me, a large part of the work is done with parents as well. Not just talking to them, but listening to them. I will go and do a home visit for every child prior to coming in. I'll do home visits, and my staff will do home visits more often than not to say, you know what, your child's done this today. They've been absolutely fantastic. Parents need that. They need the positive feedback rather than the negative feedback. And the staff, etc., put a lot of effort into phone calls home to report how well the child's done, postcards home, all simple things, but they make a difference. When you end up with two-way communication, where the parents phoning you to say, John's on his way in, but he's had a bad night, etc., you know there's that mutual trust and respect. And that for me is key. Just talking about permanent exclusions, since 2012, they've continued to rise, 7,900 in 17-18. And I think that's something we need to look at, and the fixed term exclusions. Prior to me starting at Sycamore, there were over 400 positive handling incidents within the school. The children were assaulting staff. This year we were down to 3 positive handling, and they were all in primary. So what have we done? What have we put in place? Well, I've talked about ensuring initially that we get a real understanding of the child. We listen to the child, we do an induction, we spend time with them, getting to know them, we get an understanding of the learning needs. But it's a whole partnership. It's not just the school. For many of our children, they need educational psychology involvement. They will be involved in social care. They will be involved with youth workers. And that partnership is key, that we all work together, communicate, share the information we have to make sure we have a wraparound provision to support that child and the child. Whilst they're in small groups of 6, they'll be on an individual timetable and curriculum that meets their needs. So that, again, is key. One of the most important factors is they start to believe they can be a successful learner. If I use the word inclusive, I think schools used to be very, very inclusive. It was a buzzword. And listening to Holly, it's really reassuring to hear about how they're working and how inclusive they are. I don't think all schools are like that now. I think they've got that many other pressures that sometimes they don't invest in their children, especially the most challenging ones. And that is something for us, when we work with our children, we've got to invest in them. It's almost their last chance. So, as I've stated, we invest a lot of time in them. Moving on from the initial meetings, the home visits, we have real high expectations of our pupils. When I first started, staff were a little bit wary of actually setting challenging work because the children didn't want to engage in. Now our expectations of learning, the focus is on learning rather than behaviour. The curriculum meets their needs. They're all aware of the levels they're at. If they find reading difficult, there's no stigma attached to that. Everybody reads in class for half hour a day. Children are comfortable supporting each other, peer-to-peer work, teaching each other alongside the staff. The past information is really key as well, so that we have an understanding. It's quite interesting because one of the factors is about general work ethic, which isn't really linked to school. And for many of our children, their general work ethic is their highest scorer, whereas perceived capability as a learner is very, very low. Attitude towards teachers. Where we need to get is that mutual respect. Again, going back to when I started, every door in school was fobbed. Every door had combination locks on. Now the school is the pupils. They have their school council. They interview when we have interviews for staff. The school, it's their school. They wanted more breakout spaces for break times, etc. We developed that. The relationship between staff and pupils is fantastic. And that again comes from working together, a win-win situation. As Claire has stated, partnerships are key to developing that wraparound service. Working with educational psychology service, social care. Many of our children are child in need, child protection, or early help. So safeguarding is massive. We've already talked about the mental health and emotional well-being of children. A key player with our children are CAMS, and we have our named CAMS worker now that we can speak to on a daily and weekly basis. We are part of a nurture approach, a 3-year pilot project with the Educational Psychology Service, and we use the resources such as SEAL to really develop the social and emotional aspects of learning so that it's good to be me. I can be successful. Pupils across all key stages, their progress is at least expected. For many, they're working above expected progress. The focus, as I've already stated, is on learning, not behaviour. This academic year, there, as I've said, have been only 3 positive holds. Staff can identify the early triggers. We've done lots of work around recognising early signs of anxiety, etc. And that is so important. So before it escalates, it's de-escalated. Ofsted came to visit the school 4 weeks into my term as head teacher, in September 16. The inspector said, "You must be mad. Have you got much energy? You're going to need it." I had the energy, and I also had the team. We worked together very, very closely to develop our vision of how we were going to move the school forward. Many of those staff that started with me are still in place now, but have changed their approach to how we work with children. Just as I've already said, key aspect really is the positive style of approach with parents, with other work colleagues, with other agencies, but mostly importantly with the children. And we have a really successful rewards policy in school where we have weekly Star of the Week pupils. We have, and some people might say it's not healthy, with the local proprietor of McDonald's. He said, any of your children that deserve a free meal can come and have a free meal. He's even said, when they want a job, I'm willing to give them an opportunity to work at my place. We also have had 3 now residential trips. We have the local cinema gives free vouchers for the cinema, and also other companies have also given free. I have one child who was constantly late. They actually give him an alarm clock, and it's worked to a greater or lesser extent. Just to finish off, the staff I've got are outstanding. They will go that extra mile. Whilst we've broken up now, parents have got numbers of work phones, and they will phone. Staff are willing to be on call if they need support. And for us, it's about supporting the parents as much as the child in many cases. The local community and residents, again, when I started, were anti the school because of the behaviour of the children. I've now received 3 letters from the local community stating that they think the pupils' behaviour is outstanding. The pupils go and do litter picks, they talk to the residents, and even at Easter time, the local resident group brought up Easter eggs for every child in school. The school as well, we've developed the school. We've got our own science lab now, and that's key for me. The facilities in a setting for our children need to be as good as a mainstream setting. Many of our children that come to us might not have been in science lessons because of health and safety issues. They need to learn those skills to be able to go back into those settings and be successful learners. Our pupils move on to a range of settings. We do, whilst they're with us, we have about 30 or 40% of them will get an EHCP. And that I would be critical of mainstream schools sometimes. We've had a lad this year, bottom percentiles for numeracy and literacy, came to us in year 9 and was treated as a naughty child. And that did display itself, but actually he couldn't access the curriculum being offered. And he got to year 9 and we've got him an EHCP. So I would challenge some schools about whether or not they do invest in it, educational psychology, service time, etc., to really unpick why the child is behaving as they are. But some of our children will move on to special schools. Some will go back into mainstream schools. The majority are very successful. And then we have some that in year 9 might go on to alternative provision. One of the challenges for us, we're supposed to be a short-term, short stay school, but many of our children remain a little bit longer, and because they've become successful learners, would prefer to stay with us, and parents would prefer that. But we have to encourage them to move on to their long-term placement with an understanding that they can come back and visit, and we will go and support them. We've still got lots to do, where attendance still needs to improve. We're looking to do a resistant materials room, because that's something, again, that many of our children really would like to do. But we have widened the curriculum. We do outdoor education. We do mechanics. So we have widened the curriculum. Just to finish off, you know, the local authority are currently doing alternative provision review, because I think they recognise as well that we do need to have the correct diet of provision available, because for some of our children, they require something a little bit different to re-engage them with their learning. But as I started off by saying, I believe, and we believe in our children, that every one of them can be a successful learner. And once you see that and they start taking that step, they can really, really flourish. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That's really powerful, you know, and the work that you're doing in giving life chances to young people for what is quite often that last chance threshold. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
We're now moving on to Claire Westwood from Sandwell, speech language communication needs and its links to violence. Just a note, because we've got a few more speakers and really wanted to give an opportunity to everybody. It's just been so engaging, so amazing. I wish we would actually had this for a lot longer. So if you could just kindly stick to the 10 minutes, just so that we can have the opportunity to engage with everybody at the end. Thank you. If I can hand over to you, Claire. Thank you.
Okay, just bear with me a second while I just share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Good. Okay, let me just make it bigger. Everyone see that? Yeah, whole screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I am the speech and language therapist, or one of the speech and language therapists for Sandwell Youth Offending Team. So I set up that service in 2015, and there's now 2 of us there. I'm also the therapist for the Sandwell Prue, and I also cover some secondary schools and alternative provisions. So I've come to speak to you today. I've aimed this more at sort of speech and language and its links to youth violence, rather than the specific work we're doing in Sandwell. But at the end, there's my contact details if anyone wants to find out more about that. Just be aware, I can't actually see the chat function at the minute, so if anyone wants to ask questions, I'll have to have a look at the end. Okay. That's a good start, isn't it? Oh, there we go. Okay, so you might have thought it was a little bit bizarre, a speech and language therapist coming to this meeting to speak to you. I often get that. It's a lot of people thinking it's to do with pronunciation, elocution, stutters and the King's Speech, but speech and language is much more broader than that, and it is very relevant with the young people that we work with. So when I'm talking about communication, these are the different areas that I'm talking about. So we're looking at how young people understand what is said to them, how they're able to express themselves. We're also looking at their attention and concentration spans, their social skills, so we're looking at how they can get on with other people, whether that's their friendship skills, their conversation skills, and can they alter their communication between speaking to a teacher versus speaking to a peer. So there's lots of areas within social skills that we focus on, and then in a much more minimal level with this population, we look at speech sounds and stuttering. But as I say, it's much more focused on the language and the social communication. So this is what we look at. Usually when I do this kind of presentation, I'm with you guys in person and we do a bit of a quiz. And because I can't see the chat function, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. But I want you to have a think in your head if you, the answers to these questions. So in the UK, how many children or young people in the general population have a communication difficulty? So that is that wheel that I just showed you. It's some kind of difficulty with at least one of those areas. So the options there are 40, 70, 1 or 10. So I want you to have a think in your head. It's 10%. Often what I get when I'm talking about this topic is a lot of people in our field will give a much higher number. So a lot of people say 40 or 70, and that's often because the cohorts that we work with, there's a different expected normal for their communication skills, and it's often a lot lower than the general population. But 10% is still a really high figure. So that's 10% of teenagers too. It's not just the little ones. So that's at least, 2-3 children per classroom have a communication difficulty. My second question for you is, in the UK, how many children or young people who have committed an offence have a communication difficulty? So there's 0 to 30%, 60 to 90%, 95 plus, or 50 to 60%. So again, have a think in your head where you think that figure might be. So the official statistic is 50 to 60% of young offenders have some kind of communication difficulty. So you have that absolutely huge jump between the general population and then young people who've committed an offence have a communication difficulty. And actually, I would argue that in some areas it's much higher. So I've worked in Samuel Youth Offending Team now, as I said, for 5 years. And to me, it's a lot higher there. I very rarely will do a speech and language assessment and then come across age appropriate communication skills. But this is the official statistic. A last question for you. So in the UK, how many children or young people who have committed an offence have previously undiagnosed communication difficulties? So that's undiagnosed. So before they come to a speech and language therapist who've had their difficulties picked up beforehand. So your options are 55%, 2%, 92%, or 11%. So again, have a think. So the answer is 92%. So it's very rare for a young person's communication difficulties to have been picked up previously to come into a youth offending team. And that echoes with what some of the other speakers have said. There needs to be more early identification, because often the young people are getting excluded from school, getting in trouble with the police with completely undiagnosed special educational needs. So why is knowledge about communication difficulties important in the criminal justice system? And I'm talking about criminal justice, but I do mean just teenagers who might have been excluded, come to a youth offending team, sort of more under that kind of umbrella. As I've just spoken about, it's very, very common, and it's often undiagnosed, and having good communication skills is absolutely key to so many areas of life. So it's really key for you to access the curriculum. There's so much complex vocabulary and retention of information needed in the curriculum. If you struggle with that, you're going to start having lots of negative school experiences that might lead to you disengaging in the classroom and then voting with your feet and either leaving the classroom or getting in trouble. Communication skills are so important for employment. Whether that's just getting through a job application or a job interview, or actually completing a job itself, doing things like presentations or communicating with customers, you really need to have good communication skills. And these things have an impact upon reoffending rates. So knowing about communication difficulties and having some understanding of how to support those is really, really important for our students. Okay. What this diagram shows, so SLCN is speech, language and communication needs, is that communication difficulties aren't necessarily associated with another condition. This diagram shows you that approximately half of people with dyslexia, ADHD and dyspraxia have some kind of communication difficulty. All of those with autism spectrum disorder and learning difficulties have some kind of communication difficulty. And SLI is having a specific language impairment, so just a language difficulty. So it can be associated with one of these other conditions, or it's something that can just exist for a myriad of reasons and be something that is unsupported. So what is not seen, as I just said, is the undetected speech and language difficulties, but what you do see is behaviour difficulties, emotional social difficulties, and literacy difficulties. So often pupils will be very self-aware of this. They'll often tell me they think they have dyslexia, or they tell me that they just can't concentrate, that class is too difficult, and so they start acting out because of that. But actually, if you dig a little bit deeper, some of these undetected communication needs are a root cause, or at least a contributory factor to the situation. That's something I want to stress today. Is I'm not saying speech and language difficulties are the whole picture or the whole reason for why a young person is experiencing things the way they are, but it can often be a huge contributory factor, which, if supported correctly, can make a huge difference. So having poor communication skills, it impacts upon so many areas of a young person's life. So I just want to talk you through some of these statistics. That vocabulary at the age of 5 years is a big predictor of how you're going to do in your GCSEs. So this early intervention is crucial for our students. About 2/3 of 7 to 14-year-olds with serious behaviour problems have language difficulties. There is that huge connection between behaviour and communication. I haven't really got time to go into it in depth today, but again, if anyone wants to contact me about that, I'm happy for that. Mental health difficulties, 40% of 7 to 14-year-olds referred to child psychiatric services had a never before identified language impairment. And I'm not going to go through all the stats, but you can see about half of employers and a big portion of young offenders and people who are from more disadvantaged backgrounds have communication difficulties. So it really does impact upon all areas of a young person's life. Okay, so why are these students missed so often? Often these young people can be labelled as the naughty kid, lazy, the uncooperative one. I'm sure, you know, we all work in this field, you all know and have heard of the labels that these children might come to you with, and they've internalized these labels. Potentially their family have been told this again and again by professionals, and it's really been internalized for them. Communication difficulties often masquerade as other conditions. So a huge amount of students, when they come to me as a teenager, they'll come with a label of learning difficulties, and I really do question. Obviously, a lot of young people do have learning difficulties in the traditional cognitive sense, but having those communication difficulties, not being able to access the curriculum to their full potential, doing less well on exams, do they get mislabeled with that? Also behaviour difficulties, a lot of them will be labelled, as I said, the naughty kid, have been excluded because of their behaviour, but actually there's some communication difficulties there. And a lack of awareness, I think, because of this mislabelling by professionals or by you know, the situations that people are in, there isn't the support available for the young people. And because communication difficulties are completely invisible, they're really difficult to spot unless you know what you're looking for. And I also think the general awareness within the general public is quite low of communication difficulties. Okay. So why does this cause a problem? In this slide, I'm specifically talking about the youth offending team. So if a young person comes to me in the youth offending team, and you know, even just sort of a teenager at a PRU, they have all these things that they might need to be doing with appointments and with talking to people, that having communication difficulties might trip them up in that area. So getting somewhere on time, to be on time, you have to have such good communication and executive functioning skills to understand time itself, to read a bus timetable, to plan your journey, to problem solve what to do if you're going wrong. So often these young people are late a lot. Remembering why a young person is in court. So this event might have happened 12 to 18 months ago. So for them, their memory is not strong enough to be able to remember exactly the situation that they need to talk about. Being in court, especially if it's a trial, they often have to discuss the offence, retell what's happened and why, give as much information as they can, keep it in the right order. If they're talking to a jury or if they're talking to the judge, they've got to put themselves across in a way that they want to convince someone. These are really high level communication skills that for the average person, they'd find that really difficult. So for a young person with communication difficulties, this is an incredibly difficult task. They need to recall information accurately about themselves. So if you're in a police interview and you've got a lot of questions that you need to answer, you need to be able to recall these facts and quickly. And then adjusting their communication appropriately. So again, knowing that talking to your friend versus talking to your solicitor or a judge is a very different skill, and knowing how to do that can be really hard for young people. And the last thing is post-sentencing, being able to read and understand their sentence or their court order, and then retaining the information can be really difficult. So there's lots and lots of areas where they can encounter difficulties. And obviously there are big consequences. If they can't do these things, they might end up getting a longer sentence, pleading guilty for something that they actually haven't done, which I've seen young people getting so mixed up. I've seen it happen. And also then not understanding their sentence, breaching their conditions, and then getting sort of taken back to court. One thing I really wanted to stress with our students is never assume that a communication difficulty will have been picked up previously. You are likely to be the first professional that identifies this need. So it's always important that in whatever borough you're in, you know what how to signpost a young person to a service they might need, or what you can do yourself to support that young person. So in Sandwell, I'm not sure about other boroughs, but in Sandwell we've got quite a large speech and language team, and we've got a presence throughout the schools and the local authority. So hopefully I feel that professionals would know that they can signpost to us for support, and there's lots of been training done in different settings too. Some red flags that you might want to look out for a student with communication difficulties: poor achievement at school. So I've already spoken about the curriculum issues. Difficulty coping at school. That can be for a huge range of reasons. It might be concentration in the classroom. It might be their social interaction with peers, tolerating frustration and not having to get, you know, so irate that they end up causing damage. If a student goes to any sort of special school already, difficulty managing processes such as housing and benefits. So I'm particularly thinking of maybe looked after children that are reaching the end of care, having to fill in all those forms and adhere to housing contracts, figuring out benefit systems and college applications is really difficult. Not understanding court or probation processes. Avoidance of situations that require communication. So it might be that, you know, you're offering lots of groups, or at the youth offending team, they need them to come to groups, things like that, and the young person really putting their foot down and not appearing because of anxiety of the situation. And difficulty in providing information, even when the other person present is clearly there to help. So that, you know, you can be sat there and have all the good intentions in the world and be really trying, but if they have those communication difficulties to such a level that it's still a barrier to them. Okay, the last bit is just, I wanted to take you very briefly through a typical sort of life trajectory of these young people I work with, and just map on some of the communication difficulties. So at 0 to 2 years old, James is bright, he's sociable, but he doesn't have many words. At 3 to 5, he's entering primary school. He's putting some words together, but they're very unclear when he talks. In one-to-one situations with adults, he's very well behaved and interacts well. But then at nursery and at school, he's biting and kicking the other children. Then gets to end of primary, ready to go to secondary school, and he's struggling with all aspects of schoolwork. He's always in trouble, anything from minor things like leaving the taps on to stealing, and mum's starting to find it hard to get him to go into school, and that school phobia is starting. Then James enters secondary school, but he actually avoids school a lot of the time, stays out in his local area instead. So his speech is clear. So when he's talking at you, you can't hear anything like slurred speech or anything, but he's got a very limited vocabulary, finds it really hard to understand information, and then he struggles to read or write. Starts messing about in class until he gets sent out, known as the difficult one at school. Key stage 4, so 14 to 16, James has had a night in a police cell, wasn't really sure why it was him and not the other people he was with. In school, no one messes with him, but he's got no friends, and teachers say he's not trying, and he finds everything really hard. So then James leaves school. He's internalised. He's not good at academics. He knows he won't get a job. He thinks the apprenticeships go to the smarter kids. Even though he loves motorbikes, he's not going to try and get an apprenticeship. And so he spends most of his days sleeping and then nights out in his local area. So that's a traditional trajectory of what I see with a lot of our young people, and I'm sure that sounds very familiar to a lot of you. So in summary, that was the quickest whistle-stop tour of speech and language difficulties. But I wanted to say that, so 60 to 90% of young people who've committed an offence have some difficulty with communication. So I always say to work on the sort of attitude that assume they have difficulties, because your strategies to help won't harm them. It doesn't harm anyone to give them a bit of extra processing time when you've asked them a question. And we know that the percentages are so high that it's always worth giving students benefit of the doubt. Receptive language difficulties, by that I mean understanding difficulties, are very easily missed because they're so invisible, but they're so important to identify, and that young people can also then have difficulties expressing themselves and getting on with other people. And that communication difficulties, as I've said, they hugely affect a young person's ability to participate in the justice system, but also to get on in school, get on in life. And these difficulties can then become generational, as I'm sure you're aware. So that was it really. These are my contact details if anyone wants to discuss these things further. I'll have a look at the chat now. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Some really, really profound stats there within the criminal justice system when it comes to speech, language and communication needs. It just really makes us think about our young people and their skills of oracy, you know, that formulate at such a young age, and I guess what we're really missing in this space. So thank you very much for that. Guys, just a slight change to the schedule. Owen has got to leave for another meeting in 5 minutes, and then we've got Dr. Holly Ackland and Dr. Tom Bowden from Educational Psychology to do a presentation. If I could just bring Owen in now, because I know, Owen, you have to leave, and I'm really grateful for you joining us today because your voice is so powerful to all of this as well, just to share some thoughts, reflections, or any questions you may have.
Thank you so much for having me on here. It's been really interesting to hear different people's perspectives and also engagements with young people. I think one of my questions that I have, and that was kind of going through my mind when, you know, we're talking about focusing on parents, is the type of work being done with parents. You know, I'm really, really concerned about that because as I've spoken before, a lot of the stuff starts from the home, and being a Black woman and also a migrant, understanding that actually there's a lot of issues to do with parenting, and also the shift of moving from my home country maybe to the UK has affected how children develop and also how they adapt to the education system. So that's the first thing. And also there's been another thing about inclusion as well that has been talked about here, that there has been an increase. You know, schools were very inclusive. I didn't feel like that when I was in school. When I first moved from Nigeria here to the UK, I didn't feel like it was inclusive. I went to a very white school. It wasn't necessarily, you know, it was a state school, but I never felt included. So what kind of work is being done for young people to make sure that it's an inclusive space for all types of young people? That's my question.
Thank you, Owen. Does anybody want to come in on this? Or I could take this question, Owen, and I think it's a really, really powerful question, and I think it's something that is really, really important to us. Just speaking on behalf of the VRU, it's that cultural competence and that approach that we have with young people, and how you really understand that within the education space, that not one size fits all. And, you know, in terms of faith, in terms of culture, in terms of perspective, different things mean different things to different people. And how can we all be aware of that? And how can we start understanding that language? And how can we start better understanding that space? And I think what you're saying is actually really poignant in the time that we're in now. and in terms of the space that we're in right now. And I think for all of us as educators, it's something that we're absolutely reflecting on in this space. There's lots that has been done, but there's certainly a lot more to do within this space as well. And I just think continually having this discourse and having these conversations and absolutely keeping this dialogue, you know, as a priority is where we start really making a difference and shaping and impacting this space. So thank you so much for sharing that. But yeah, like I said, for us as a VRU, especially in a West Midlands context, we're such a diverse community here, you know, that anything that we do, you know, has got to really, really reflect that, you know, and that's something that's incredibly significant to us, actually listening to our communities, not doing two, but doing together, working together, that co-production, the community voice. It's really, really powerful for us. We hope, you know, at every opportunity, respect, you know, that voice is really leading all that we do. Can't hear you.
Sorry, my screen froze a little bit there. Thank you. I mean, that makes sense. And I think for me, just as a young person and as someone who's also a professional working with young Black women, I do believe that there is a lot of great discussions being had right now amongst professionals, amongst people. But, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement that we've just kind of seen happen, and you can see that people still feel like there is still a level of disparity or lack of acknowledgement. I wonder, you know, with some of the people that work with PRUs, how many percentage of those people are from Black and ethnic minority groups, and what's being done for those people? Because, for example, as a Nigerian, you know, when I used to live in Nigeria, relatively middle class in Nigeria, went to a private school in Nigeria, moved here at a young age because it was a lot more cost efficient and more economic for my parents to move here. But then the complete shock and the complete lack of understanding of me was, you know, really, really bothered me. And I think that kind of plays in even to my parents, my mom. My dad never moved here. My dad's passed away now. It played into my mom not being understood in the place to work. Obviously, that's not a police thing to deal with, but it's just what my question here is: what exactly is being actively done, for, you know, through professionals, through education. I really believe education is the answer. But when I mean education, I mean actually seeing how do you actually relate to your classmates. You know, how do you relate? You know, how do we relate to the parents of this child that may be acting up? What are the cultural differences that they may have, and how do we kind of make sure that they're included? And I personally think the answer is employing people, as you said, that are from diverse backgrounds that may have understanding, employing people that are multilingual as well. Because, you know, for my mom is an English speaker, in fact, very good at speaking English, but she wouldn't understand certain things a lot more unless you speak to her in Yoruba. So these are the things that I'm just you know, kind of willing to challenge about and have more conversations about. Obviously, time is short. I have to kind of go now. But these are things that I think it will be good for you guys to think on to help move this narrative forward.
Thank you, Owen, and I look forward for you being such a central part to everything that takes place within this education space with us. Thank you so much for your time and your reflections. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye. She's great, Owen is. Right, if we can move on. Sorry, folks, I'm conscious of the fact that we're just running slightly over time, so thank you for remaining with us if you have the time. Next, we've got Dr. Holly Ackland and Dr. Ben Bowden from Solihull Educational Psychology team, and they're doing some fantastic work in terms of early intervention psychology and its links to violence.
Thanks, Nadia. So just wanted to kind of start by positioning the role of educational psychologists within this field, really, and give a bit of a backdrop before Tom continues by giving some more information around exactly what we're doing at the moment in Solihull and some of the developments that we've got in the pipeline. because I think when we initially started having communication with Nadia, she was quite surprised at how active we were in this particular field. And I guess that's worth exploring in terms of thinking about the traditional role of EPs in terms of reducing barriers to learning and enhancing wellness outcomes, and how that feeds into this area of work, really, in terms of thinking about, as people have identified those kind of systemic barriers and those risk factors across systems, in terms of the young person being positioned within those multiple layers across both the family home and those community orientated layers that are broader outside of those immediate environments, and thinking about how we really make a difference within that. So I think as educational psychologists, we're really well equipped to be working with this cohort of young people, thinking about those complex and intertwined needs, and as others have highlighted, our ability to formulate really about those hidden layers. So not just thinking about the behaviours that we're seeing, but all of those kind of complex intertwined factors that are likely to be contributing towards any young person's presenting needs and behaviours. And I think as others have kind of indicated, taking that holistic approach is something that we're really passionate about, and working with others collaboratively within a community context. So for ourselves in Solihull, we've purposely taken a community orientated approach towards setting up a new service from September, with a real focus on how we integrate ourselves within the community to be doing that work on the ground, but also how we're working at a systemic level and at an organisational level in terms of how we support wellness enhancing environments, and how we support better outcomes for young people, especially thinking about the layers of vulnerability that lots of young people experience who end up coming into contact with the youth justice system, and some of that cumulative disadvantage, and thinking about how that kind of stacks up over time, and actually how we're able to break those cycles of disadvantage sooner and earlier and more effectively. So trying to think about kind of pooling our understanding of the evidence base, of the literature, of the research about what works, and feeding that into practice and making that come to life. And I think we found it really kind of valuable to be working alongside the youth justice system and our kind of yacht team really closely, in terms of working up some developments around new areas and new ways of working, thinking about those kind of partnerships and how we branch out into the community, thinking about some of those volunteer kind of organisations, some of the community organisations, and how we can work together more effectively. So I guess kind of our angle is the psychology, and thinking about actually how we utilise what's known and the research base in terms of putting that into practice. And for myself and Tom, we've both completed our doctoral research and doctoral theses in the area of youth justice. So Tom particularly was looking at diversionary practice and that pathway out of offending, and for myself was looking at youth young offenders and their life trajectories, so thinking about their narratives. And I was really interested to see kind of, Stephen had picked up on that real importance about identity and narrative and self-belief, and that certainly fed into some of my findings around the importance of kind of cognitive shifts and how a young person sees themselves and their ability to make that change in terms of diverting from an offending pathway to a desistance pathway or pro-social pathway, and through those relationships with others, how their narrative can really make a difference in challenging their own in terms of how they see themselves and their possible opportunities in life, and how they can make a difference. So that was really positive to hear. But I think we're really keen to kind of utilise our knowledge base and utilise the research findings within our doctoral studies into real life and practice. And I think that's where I'll hand over to Tom to give us more information about that.
Great. So I was going to talk a little bit about a project we've had recently commissioned from one of the government's What Works Centre. But before that, I just wanted to say how interesting and inspiring it's been and how much of a privilege it is really to be part of this group and to listen to people that are so passionate about changing the trajectories of these disadvantaged young people. So the project I want to talk about is something we're planning on doing from September in the North Solihull. And the rationale from that has come from us understanding the context and kind of the data around the high prevalence of risk factors upstream of offending within certain locality areas in the north of Solihull, including the areas having the third largest degree of inequality out of the 149 upper tier local authorities in England. High prevalence of kind of internalising and externalising problem behaviours. Antisocial behaviour call-outs were 3 times the average in these areas compared to the rest of Solihull. Complex mental health needs in these areas, and indicators of social exclusion as well. So a high proportion of children in the alternative provision or that are being excluded from school. And interestingly as well, the areas have the 97th percentile, in the 97th percentile in local authorities in England for young people that are referred to social care services but don't meet the threshold criteria for involvement. So that's a real indicator there that there's a real cohort of socially excluded young people demonstrating these risk factors upstream of offending. And therefore, a key focus of the programme is to work with those young people and families that are socially excluded, that are outside the threshold of conventional service delivery, and show those risk factors. And so what we want to do is, or what we are going to do is use kind of community-orientated principles to meet those young people and families where they're at, not just in terms of the context they're in terms of the community, but where they're at psychologically as well, by using kind of approaches to build trust, such as mentalisation theory, and also to kind of support them in developing pathways to pro-social trajectories, using mentalisation theory and the Good Lives model. So we'll be using a vulnerability index, and we'll be collaborating with local the local voluntary community sector to kind of leverage the knowledge that they have in the community to reach out to those young people that demonstrate those risk factors and those indices of social exclusion. And we'll be looking to support them across a pathway that will have 3 phases. So the first phase will look at how we can kind of build a platform, a secure base kind of attachment, a platform of trust from which everything else can be scaffolded from by engaging kind of with that young person, having a single key worker that goes out to where the young person's at, uses theory of mentalisation, supported with kind of psychological supervision and a team around the worker. So the idea is that all the expertise of the team around that worker is scaffolded through that one key worker, and the young person therefore isn't expected to make 5 or 6 relationships with young people. So I'm a firm believer that we don't just have an automatic right just to kind of access this young person's life. We need their consent, and more important than that, we need their trust. And so scaffolding the relational demands with young people that are, have built up quite a distrust in the world, that are kind of socially excluded from conventional forms of support is really important to this process. And to do that, we'll use a pre-intervention stage where we'll build up an understanding of the assets in that young person's system, so in the family, in the community, and how we can use that to kind of introduce ourselves to the young person and build up trust and integrate those assets in the young person's system. And from that point, we're then going to look to use the Good Lives model, which is a model of psychological formulation that's based around understanding that young person's human needs and understanding that kind of how that young person is looking to fulfill those human needs, and identifying pathways where there's kind of maladaptive routes to fulfilling those needs. So that might be due to like lack of opportunity or lots of different factors. And we want to look at how we can reorientate those pathways towards more pro-social pathways where those that young person's human needs are met. And obviously to do that, we need trust, so we can build up that trust so that that young person can share what those needs are. And we also need to kind of follow the principles of co-construction as well. So that young person will be at the centre of the process and will be developing their own Good Lives plan. And it's based around kind of the principles of autonomy and competency and relatedness the whole way through. and then we'll be looking at how we can, you know, deliver that plan that young person has put together, in terms of providing wraparound intervention and multi-systemic intervention for that young person. It might involve things like support and reintegration into education, employment or training, or family systems work, or various forms of socio-ecological interventions, so developing networks in the community and providing them with kind of pro-social opportunities in the community that meet their human needs. Using different psychological modalities, so motivational interviewing or cognitive behavioural therapy or other approaches to support that young person, depending on their needs, and then supporting kind of the liaison and referral to other services. So the idea is, once we've built up that platform of trust, you know, we can bridge that gap that, between the young person and forms of service delivery, and support kind of their integration, and kind of remove those barriers that were producing kind of the social exclusion. Yeah, and I suppose what we're looking to do in the long term is look at how we can kind of evaluate this, learn from it, learn from you know, all the amazing approaches that you guys are putting into place as well, and kind of share practice as well. And we're planning on evaluating it with the support of the Anna Freud Centre as well. And yeah, hopefully in terms of future directions, looking at how we can support kind of other multidisciplinary teams in the local authority more broadly with this approach as well. So yeah, that's everything, I think, unless I've missed anything, Holly.
No, I think you covered it all really thoroughly there. I think we were also talking about kind of developing that vulnerability index, weren't we, in terms of identifying young people sooner, and to have kind of that shared language across local authority, so that actually partners across the community can be utilising this tool as a preventative kind of promotive measure. But I think our work kind of very much kind of fits within that orientation of appreciating that, you know, we can't continue to kind of place the emphasis on the young person themselves in terms of them making the change when they kind of are least equipped to do so. Actually, you know, it's about supporting those layers and those systems around the child in order to make a real difference. And certainly within the work we're doing within the Educational Psychology Service in Solihull, we've been very keen to look at ways in which we can work collaboratively in order to support kind of wellness enhancing environments, whether that be within family homes or within school settings, but utilising kind of evidence bases and the research out there in order to inform how we're working to strengthen those systems. So yeah, it would be really interesting to kind of see how our work pans out over the next year, and really keen to link up with others who've been on the speaking today. It'd be really good to get those links and relationships and partners across different services.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Holly. Yeah, real pertinent information there in terms of how we support children, and quite right in terms of the fact that they're actually least equipped to make the changes that they need, and what these young people actually need are deep psychological approaches. Because with some of our most vulnerable young people, we're talking about, you know, issues that are, you know, generational. They are structures of trauma, and actually in terms of application and the support that they need, sometimes it's not as simple as a 10-week intervention or mentor work, as critical, as important as they are. Actually, we need evidence-based, deep psychological approaches to work with some of the most vulnerable and traumatised young people. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just wanted to say, sorry we run over. It's just been so profound coming together today, and just having everybody around the table, and everybody just sharing their expertise, sharing their experiences, and how we can support vulnerable young people and really make their futures real again. And what comes, I guess, loud and clear from all of this is how we can all really come together to put strength in this system. So my ask from you guys today is, you know, if we can absolutely continue this conversation, keep it going. We're going to send out a data sheet. So data, evidence-based approach is really critical to us as a VRU. Tell us what you feel would be the indicators in terms of recognising vulnerability within young people. You know, is it social, emotional, mental health? Is it exclusions? Is it pupil premium? So just analysing the data, how can we look at building regionally our own local profiles within local authority, and then just really use that information to kind of, you know, drive and shape some of these challenges that we have in order to support vulnerable young people, and how our services can come together to do that. So if you could just kindly fill that in and send that back, I'd really appreciate it. Also, any feedback from today as well would be really great. And also expressions of interest. So we're creating a sector reference group for the education space, and also really importantly communities of practice, because there's so much going on in the curriculum at the moment. You know, I mean, it's been such a rich conversation that I've been having. You know, there are some schools that are doing, you know, some amazing work out there in this space. I mean, I can just give you an example around maths as well. You know, a good friend of mine is actually leading on her leadership program of underachieving black boys in Key Stage 3 maths. There are other practitioners as well that are looking at doing work within that math space as well, underachievement and what its impacts are. Such exciting pieces of work that are taking place within this space at the moment. How can we come together? How can we bring these, you know, curriculum-based communities of practice as well? You know, from my kind of experience within the education space as well, you know, looking at, you know, education as a second language as well. Again, lots of extensive work takes place within that piece as well. And I know there's individual projects taking place with young people that are pupil premium. So how can we bring all of that collaborative work together in the curriculum space, and how can we just look at that wider piece strategically as well, how we can all come together, you know, within the authorities, how we can come together locally, how we can come together as strategic partners to support that shared agenda of, you know, supporting vulnerable young people, because that will always be a priority to all of us, and how we can make their futures real, and how we can help them, support them and enable them to thrive as citizens. So thank you all so much for joining us, and really, really would appreciate everybody's feedback, and in terms of the data sheets as well, and hopefully we'll be continuing this conversation. Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists as well. Thank you to the audience as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Nadia.
Thanks, Nadia. Really, really good. I've written so many things down. So yeah, really, really good. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks for your support, Chelsea. Really appreciate it.
That was